Here's a sample of ornaments I'm going to show you how to make today. I call these 5-minute ornaments. They were designed to be very, very quick to make. So I'm going to try to show you how to do that today. The first thing is, if you want to add a lot of color, you could do this ornament without adding color to it. But if you're going to add color, you need a fairly light wood so it'll take the color. You could do this shape, of course, without it, and just plain wood. I start off, I'm out of between centers, and I use my chuck. Because I want these ornaments to be very fast to make, I use a drive center called a step center that actually fits in my chuck. And that allows me to rough out the piece and turn the tenon for the chuck and never have to remove the chuck. So it makes everything go faster. Now I use a spindle roughing gouge that I've sharpened at about a 45-degree angle. A lot of spindle roughing gouges come really blunt, but I sharpen mine a little bit finer. Cuts faster and cleaner. So I anchor the tool, then you rub the bevel, you lift the tool up and you let it cut. Now I point the flute in the direction that I want to go. And each time I'm lifting the handle a little bit further. And when you get close to round, you can hear it ticking right there. It's not quite round yet. It's close. So I'll make one more pass. A little bit out of round out there. Close enough, because we're going to round the whole thing up in a minute. I take my parting tool and I cut a tenon from the chuck. Now one of the tricks that I use, my chuck has dovetail jaws, so I don't want a flat tenon, which is what this is. I take my parting tool and I angle it and I cut downhill and I bulk that left edge. If you have a freshly sharpened parting tool, this left edge also cuts. So as I slide that down there, I cut that left edge. What that does is gives me a square shoulder to sit on my chuck. So then I remove this blank, get my tailstock out of the way, and pull the tailstock out so you don't poke your elbow into it. Then I remove this drive center. Now one of the tricks that I use in order to keep things running square, when you have a wood blank, the wood compresses differently on end grain versus side grain. So what I do is I draw an X on here parallel to the grain, and then I draw a line perpendicular to the grain. I do when I put it in the chuck, I put one of those X's right near the gap of my chuck. What that does is that orients the grain so that there's equal amount of side grain and end grain in every jaw. And so it tends to make the chuck run more true. And you'll notice the tenon is not as long as my jaws are, and it's sitting flat against there. What that does, it helps it run true, but also when I put pressure out here when I'm turning, if I didn't have this little shoulder on here, it would make the turning wobble a little bit, and eventually it would just come out of the chuck. That's why a lot of you probably lose your piece when you're turning. When you have that little shoulder on there, that prevents that. So I can be fairly aggressive in my early stages and not have to worry too much about turning it. Now, I'm using a half-inch spindle gouge for this project. And I anchor the tool, I put the bevel on there, I lift it up till it starts to cut. Now since I'm going downhill, I'm going to have to lift the handle. And I do that with my body. I've got the tool on my hip. If I use my hands to do this, which I did right there, you'll notice I got a big bump right there, I got a bump right there. It's not as smooth as I want. By letting the tool do the cutting and moving my body, and what I do is I watch the outside of the piece. I don't watch the tool cutting. What I want to do is, this is very much like driving a car. I want the tool to control the cut, and I want my body to control it. And by watching back here, I'm moving the tool, and I just get the shape I want. It's very much like driving a car. If you're driving a car, you don't look at the steering wheel when you go around the corner, you look at the corner. Well, that's exactly what I'm doing here. I start that cut, and I watch the back side, and I just tell myself, where do I want that cut to go? And I just make my body do it. So we'll go back. The other thing that I do to make these cuts cleaner, I'm trying to reduce all my sanding time. That's part of the reason I don't use scrapers. When the wood is crossing the tool at this angle at 90 degrees, it's a very coarse cut. It's very fast, but it's coarse. If I can orient the tool so that the wood is crossing at an angle, I get a cleaner cut. So what I'm going to do on this one, instead of starting right here, where it's cutting across the tip, what I'm going to do is rotate the flute slightly so that it's now cutting at about 1 o'clock. What that does, it leaves a very, very clean cut. And you'll notice also I slow the tool down a tremendous amount as I get toward the center. The reason I do that is you want the tool to cut at the rate the wood wants to cut. If I force the cut, I'm tearing out grain. I'm not going to get as clean a cut. So I want to slow down as the diameter gets smaller. We slow it down. We relax our grip and let the tool do the cutting. You see how slow the tool is moving here? I'm just letting the tool cut very, very slow. Really toward that end, extremely slow. Now what I get is a super fine cut. It's almost polished. Requires very little sanding. So let's go back and waste away some of this. Now another trick that I use sometimes, this is probably for your advanced turners, to waste away this area. Normally I put the bevel on there and I start cutting, and you know, it takes a little bit of time to waste it away. But I found if I hold the tool up so that it's becoming a scraper, the handle is now higher than the cutting edge, I can waste away that wood very quickly. Then I go back to doing my bevel rubbing cuts. Now I'm going to leave the tenon fairly thick right now because I'm going to do some texturing. But I'm going to stop and do sanding real quick. I'm going to hit it with 220 grit. You know, if your skills aren't quite up there, go with a little coarser grit. I got a bad area right there. There we go. What you do is you look at the surface and you watch it how it blends. There actually may be some grain there. Sometimes the discoloration of the wood looks like it's a sanding problem and it's not. So 220 grit. I'm going to make my last passes really lightly. I want to take out any errant scratches from that grit. 320, I don't skip any grits. If I had to start at 120, be 120, 150, 180, 220, 320. Now we'll go to 400. And then 600. And we stop and look at it for any sanding scratches. We don't want any scratches at all anywhere. If you have a scratch somewhere, sand with the grain. If you have to, go all the way back to 220. Touch it up again lightly. Okay. Now that we've sanded it, I'm going to go back and add one more detail because I want to show you a different tool. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to cut a little cove right here. Again, I rub the bevel. To cut a cove, you always cut from high point to low point. High point to low point. Now, anytime you start a cut like this, it will try to kick back on you if you have the flute in this direction. If I have the flute pointing exactly sideways, the kickback is so gentle I can easily back it up with my thumb and stop it from kicking back on me. So I start the cut, I've got a shoulder, so it won't kick back. Then I push it in, I open up the flute. Again, I try to cut with that angled area. That leaves me a very, very clean cut that requires very little sanding. almost no sanding, but I'm going to hit it real lightly. Got a torn grain right at the very bottom. That's where it's going to happen. It's going to happen. And lightly. 200. Oops. Picked up the wrong grit. There we go. 600. And we'll put my tool rest back on. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you a couple little tools. Sorby sells a texturing spiraling tool. This is one of the spiraling cutters. I'm not going to use it for spiraling. I'm going to use it just to create a texture. You turn the speed down. You push in fairly hard. And you create a texture. Now you could slide back and forth and rotate it if you want. I'm going to use the angle cutter and push in. I'm not going to push flat. I'm just going to use the edge. And that creates a different texture. You'll be able to see that better in a minute. Then I'm going to use a thing called the Sorby Elf. And I'm going to go in there and at a very slight angle. I'm going to cut right there. Then I'm going to go over here and I'm going to cut this direction. What that does is produces a texture in the opposite direction that I want to go. Now we'll hit it really lightly with 600 grit just to get rid of any torn grain that comes up from that. Now I found that if you want to add color, the colors come out very much brighter if I have the finish already applied. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use a thing called a HUD abrasive. You can buy this at Woodcraft, you can buy it from Penn State Industries, a lot of different wood turning places sell it. What it is, it's a wax, it's a heat abrasive wax that has some abrasive in it. So I just put some wax on there. Then I run the lathe at fairly high speed so it'll melt the wax. And it works off of friction. You can probably see it change as I go across there. Fold the cloth up and force it in the middle here. You may have to refold the cloth sometimes to get it to work. There we go. Now we've got our finish applied. Now I'm going to take some markers, put my tool rest back on there to give me something to support my hand, and we'll just add a little color. Slow the lathe speed down a little bit. And then we'll add a little green, maybe in here. Now if I want to add just a line for decorative purposes, let me find a marker that actually works. Some of my markers have gotten really old. There we go. So I'll just put a little line here just to create a little fine detail. Just to try to take the ornament to the next level. There we go. Now those colors stand out a lot brighter because I didn't take the green all the way to the bottom, I see. Got the tear out down in there. There we go. And I might take that purple and put a little line dead center. Okay, now what I need to do is go back and create my little finial or a way to hang the ornament. I'm going to use a spindle gouge a little smaller. This is a Thompson 3/8" detail gouge. Rub the bevel. Go down in here and waste away a little of that wood. Always anchor the tool, always rub the bevel first, then lift it up and let it start cutting. Now one of the tricks I use, you probably saw me do it right there, is I make that cut and I'm using my body to control it. So I bring the cut back, it's still rubbing the bevel. It's still touching the wood. So all I have to do when I get out here is I have to move extremely slightly. And it lets me start to cut again. But I'm using my muscle memory to control that cut better. Now I'm making a little cove right here. You want to be real careful not to touch, when I'm going down this way, not to touch that left edge against this left shoulder. It'll kick back on you. So I start the other cut right there, and I just kind of blend them, and round that shoulder over just a little. Now what I do now is, I don't want to take off very much of this, because I want to use that HUD abrasive again, if I can reach in there with it. There we go. Sometimes you have to take your pocket knife and actually carve away part of this to give you a sharp angle to reach in. And then we'll speed the lathe up. It's a smaller diameter here, so I have to speed the lathe up even more to get enough friction to spread the wax. There we go. You don't want to push extremely hard. It takes a little bit of experimentation to learn how much you can get away with. But then we'll go in and I'll take this down as far as I dare. I'm going to support it with my fingers, and I'm going to take little bitty light cuts. Just be gentle. If it starts to wobble on you, put a little bit more friction on your finger. Now if you're really nervous at this point, just stop it and cut it off with a pocket knife. There we go. Now that's pretty good. Now sometimes you can go back with your wax and you can kind of sort of polish that area. Sometimes you may have to go back and actually put some more finish on, or I use hand buffing wheels or powered buffing wheels to polish that edge. That last little part. Then I take I got a little tiny drill bit and it's got a jeweler screwdriver and a pin vise. When I'm doing these production wise, I use my Dremel to drill this hole. It goes very fast. But this works pretty good. I was a camera repairman until all the cameras went electronic, and then we couldn't do it anymore. So I have all these neat little tools left over. And yet, this is a real fine drill bit. I'm not sure what size it is. I'll have to go look and see. What I use is, I buy these little earring pieces from Hobby Lobby, and I actually cut them off. They're about 2 inches long. And this is actually one of the scrap pieces. Since they're 2 inches long, I'll use the first part that has the hook on it, and then the second part that's left over, because I'm so cheap, I'll use this second part and just bend the hook myself. Cut that on there, do a quick test fit. That's good. Now we'll take some CA glue. I use the medium CA, and I put a little bit, just a little bit. Get it to flow. Oh, there we go. And then drop that down in there, and then spray it with my accelerator.